The sound of expensive paper tearing in half was louder than the crystal glasses clinking in the ballroom, slicing through the murmur of the elite crowd like a physical blow. Victoria van der Hoeven, draped in a blood-red velvet gown that cost more than most families earn in a year, let the shredded pieces of the check flutter from her manicured fingers into a half-empty glass of champagne, her laughter ringing out cold and brittle against the sudden silence. "Oh, darling," she sneered, looking down at the woman standing before her with a mix of pity and disgust. "Did you really think your little pocket change would make a difference here? This is a gala for serious philanthropists, not a soup kitchen donation drive." The woman she addressed, Nia Sterling, stood perfectly still, her dark skin glowing against the pristine white of her silk dress, her expression unreadable, though inside a calculation had already begun that would dismantle everything Victoria held dear before the final course was served. Welcome back to Her Secrets, Her Stories, the place where we uncover the hidden battles and quiet victories of women who refuse to be defined by others' expectations. Before we unravel exactly how this night of humiliation turned into a legend of retribution, I want to ask you to take a brief moment to support the channel by hitting that subscribe button and liking this video, as your support is the fuel that keeps these stories coming. Also, I'd love to hear from you in the comments. Tell me your name, which city you are watching from, and if you've ever had to smile while someone tried to make you feel small. Let's build our community right there in the comment section. Nia didn't flinch as the pieces of the check, a check that Victoria hadn't even bothered to read, dissolved into the bubbling alcohol. The room was frozen, hundreds of eyes fixed on the confrontation, waiting for the inevitable moment when the intruder would retreat in shame. But Nia was not an intruder, even if everyone in the room treated her like one. To understand the weight of this moment, we have to rewind to 3 hours earlier, when the snow was falling softly over the Manhattan skyline, painting the city in a deceptive layer of peace. Nia had stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in her penthouse, smoothing the fabric of her custom-made gown, a dress the color of fresh snow, embroidered with subtle gold threads that caught the light with every movement. It was Christmas Eve night that was supposed to be about charity, warmth, and the spirit of giving. But Nia knew that the Van der Hoeven Winter Solstice Gala was none of those things. It was a battlefield disguised as a party, a place where social currency was traded more aggressively than stocks on Wall Street. She had hesitated before accepting the invitation, knowing well that spaces like these were not built for women who looked like her, women with deep cocoa skin, natural hair styled in an elegant updo, and a history that didn't include a trust fund or a famous last name. Nia was a self-made titan in the world of biotech venture capital, a ghost figure who owned majority stakes in companies these socialites used every day, yet her face remained unknown to the tabloids because she preferred power over fame. She had decided to attend tonight for one specific reason: Arthur van der Hoeven, Victoria's husband and the host of the gala. His charitable foundation, which supported orphanages and educational programs across the state, was quietly hemorrhaging money due to bad investments, a fact Nia had uncovered during her due diligence for a potential partnership. She wasn't going there to network. She was going there to save them. As her car pulled up to the grand entrance of the hotel, the air smelled of roasted chestnuts and pine needles, a sharp contrast to the anxiety tightening in her chest. The paparazzi outside were a frenzy of flashbulbs, screaming the names of actresses and heirs. But when Nia stepped out, the cameras lowered slightly, the photographers confused by her anonymity. She walked the red carpet with a grace that seemed to float above the chaos, her head held high, ignoring the whispered questions of "Who is she?" that rippled through the bystanders. Inside, the ballroom was a masterpiece of excess. 20-foot Christmas trees dripped with Swarovski crystals. The tables were laden with lobster and caviar, and a live orchestra played a waltz that sounded like old money. But the moment Nia stepped across the threshold, the temperature seemed to drop. It wasn't the air conditioning. It was the social climate. Eyes scanned her, assessed her worth, and dismissed her in seconds. She saw the familiar flicker of confusion followed by disdain on the faces of the guests, a look that asked, "Did the help get lost?" She moved toward the bar, asking for sparkling water, but the bartender looked right through her to serve a man in a tuxedo behind her. "Excuse me," Nia said, her voice calm but firm. The bartender glanced at her with barely concealed irritation. "We are busy, miss. Wait your turn." It was a small slight, a microaggression she had experienced 1,000 times, but tonight it felt sharper, perhaps because of the festive backdrop that preached love and equality. She finally got her water and made her way through the crowd, searching for Arthur, but instead, she found herself in the orbit of Victoria van der Hoven. Victoria was holding court near the center of the room, surrounded by a sycophantic circle of women who laughed too loud at her jokes. Victoria was the undisputed queen of this social circle, a woman who wielded exclusion like a weapon. She spotted Nia from 20 feet away, and her eyes narrowed, scanning the white dress that rivaled her own red one in elegance. Nia approached, intending to be brief and professional. "Good evening, Mrs. van der Hoven," Nia said, extending a polite hand. "It's a beautiful event." Victoria didn't take the hand. Instead, she took a sip of her drink, letting the silence stretch until it became uncomfortable for everyone, except Nia. "I don't believe we've met," Victoria said finally, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "And I usually know everyone who can afford a ticket to this evening." The circle of women tittered. "My name is Nia Sterling. I'm here to make a contribution to the foundation." Victoria raised an eyebrow, looking Nia up and down, her gaze lingering on Nia's jewelry, simple diamond studs that were real, flawless, and worth more than Victoria's entire necklace, though Victoria lacked the eye to recognize quality that didn't scream a brand name. "A contribution," Victoria repeated, as if the word tasted sour. "Well, the donation box for small cash gifts is near the coat check, dear. This area is for our platinum benefactors." The dismissal was blatant. She was telling Nia to go sit with the coats, to make herself invisible. Nia felt the heat rise up her neck, not from shame, but from a simmering anger. She thought of the check in her clutch. $10 million. Enough to clear the foundation's debt and fund their programs for 3 years. She had prepared it because she believed in the cause, not the people behind it. "I prefer to handle my donations personally," Nia said, keeping her voice steady. "I have a check here for Arthur. Is he around?" Victoria laughed then, a harsh, barking sound. "Arthur is busy with important people. He doesn't have time to collect pocket money from every aspiring social climber who wanders in off the street. If you really want to help, maybe you can ask the catering staff if they need an extra hand clearing tables. You seem dressed for ... service." The racism was no longer subtle. It was a slap in the face. The women around Victoria gasped softly, then giggled, taking their cue from the queen bee. Nia's grip on her clutch tightened. She looked around the room, the luxury, the excess, the waste. And here was this woman, dripping in diamonds, mocking a donation she hadn't even seen. Nia realized then that the check wasn't just money. It was a test, and Victoria was failing it spectacularly. "I insist," Nia said, pulling the envelope from her bag. "I think you'll want to see this." She held the envelope out. Victoria looked at it like it was infected. The music seemed to fade into the background as the nearby guests turned to watch the scene. This was the moment the trap was set, though Victoria was too blinded by arrogance to see the steel jaws closing around her ankle. She snatched the envelope from Nia's hand, not to open it, but to destroy the moment. "You insist?" Victoria hissed, stepping closer, her perfume cloying and sweet. "You come into my house, my gala, and insist on things? Let me show you what we do with unsolicited interruptions." She didn't open the envelope. She didn't look at the amount. She simply tore it. Once, twice. The thick paper resisted, but her anger gave her strength. She dropped the pieces into her champagne glass. "There," Victoria smiled, the cruelty in her eyes shining brighter than the lights on the tree. Now, security will escort you out. You're making the guests uncomfortable." Nia watched the ink on the submerged scraps of paper begin to bleed into the golden liquid, representing $10 million of salvation dissolving into waste, and something inside her shifted from anger to a cold, absolute resolve. The room was deathly silent now. The orchestra had stopped playing, sensing the tension that sucked the air out of the ballroom. A heavy-set security guard began moving toward them, his hand reaching for his radio, but Nia held up a single hand, a gesture of such commanding authority that he actually stopped in his tracks. "You ripped it," Nia stated, her voice not loud, but projecting with a clarity that reached the corners of the room. "You didn't even look at it." Victoria rolled her eyes, signaling to the guard again. "I don't need to look at trash. Goodbye." Nia smiled then, but it wasn't a smile of submission. It was the terrifyingly calm smile of a predator who has just cornered its prey. She turned her back on Victoria, not to leave, but to walk toward the small stage where the microphone stand stood waiting for the speeches. "Where do you think you're going?" Victoria shrieked, her composure cracking. "Get her out of here." But Nia moved with a speed and purpose that defied the heavy atmosphere. She stepped onto the stage, took the microphone, and the feedback whine cut through the room, silencing the few remaining whispers. Victoria was marching toward the stage now, fury distorting her face. But before she could reach the stairs, Nia spoke. "I came here tonight with a gift." Nia's voice boomed through the speakers, smooth and rich. "A gift of $10 million to save the Van der Hoeven Foundation from the bankruptcy it is facing in exactly ... double quotes. She checked the diamond watch on her wrist. 48 hours. The silence that followed was absolute. It wasn't just quiet. It was a vacuum. You could hear the wind howling outside the glass windows. Victoria froze mid-step, her face draining of color. The word bankruptcy hung in the air like a guillotine blade. From the side entrance of the ballroom, Arthur van der Hoeven emerged, his face gray and sweating. He had been trying to secure loans all night on his phone in the hallway, failing miserably. He heard Nia's words and looked at his wife, then at the stage. "10 million?" Arthur whispered, his voice trembling. He scrambled forward, pushing past guests. Who are you?" Nia looked down at him from the stage. "I am Nia Sterling, CEO of Sterling Bioventures. I own the debt regarding your 3 major properties, Arthur. I came here to forgive that debt and invest in your orphanages as a Christmas gesture." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Sterling Bioventures was a unicorn company, a legend in the financial world. Everyone knew the name, but few knew the face. And Victoria had just thrown its CEO out like a beggar. Victoria stood trembling, her eyes darting from her husband's horrified face to Nia's calm visage. "She's lying," Victoria stammered, her voice thin and desperate. "She's just ... she's nobody. Look at her." Arthur turned on his wife, his eyes filled with a rage that had been bottling up for years of overspending and arrogance. "Victoria, shut up," he snapped, a sound so raw that the guests recoiled. He looked back at Nia, his hands shaking. "Miss Sterling, please. If you had a check, we can ... we can write a new one. I apologize for my wife. She didn't know." Nia leaned into the microphone, her eyes locking onto Victoria's. "She didn't know? No, Arthur. She didn't care. She judged me by the color of my skin and the fact that I didn't curtsy to her throne. She ripped up the salvation of your family because she preferred the satisfaction of humiliating me." Nia paused, letting the weight of the moral failure sink into the minds of every guest. "You see, arrogance is expensive, but racism? That cost you everything." Nia reached into her purse and pulled out her phone. She tapped the screen twice, the sound amplified by the mic she was holding near it. "I am instructing my finance team to revoke the offer. The funds are being redirected to the Harlem Youth Center effective immediately." A murmur of shock turned into a roar of whispers. Phones lit up all over the room as people checked stock tickers and news alerts. The news of the failed partnership was already leaking, No, no, please. Arthur fell to his knees, literally to his knees, at the edge of the stage, grasping at the hem of Nia's dress, a stark reversal of the power dynamic from moments ago. We will lose the house. We will lose everything. Victoria, tell her you're sorry. Apologize. Victoria was paralyzed. The humiliation she had tried to inflict on Nia was now rebounding on her with the force of a tsunami. She looked around for support, but her friends were taking steps back, creating a physical distance between themselves and the social radioactivity emanating from her. Victoria choked out. I didn't mean ... double quotes. Nia cut her off. It's too late for apologies. You wanted to know what I'm worth? I'm worth the lesson you're about to learn. Nia placed the microphone back on the stand with a definitive clunk. She stepped down from the stage, the crowd parting for her like the Red Sea. No one dared to meet her eye, yet everyone was filming her. She walked past the champagne glass where the soggy remnants of the check floated, a $10 million cocktail of regret. As she reached the exit, she paused and turned back to Victoria, who was now sobbing into her hands while her husband screamed at her in front of New York's elite. Merry Christmas, Victoria, Nia said softly. I hope you enjoy the cold. It's the only thing you'll be getting for free from now on. The aftermath was swift and brutal, unraveling faster than a cheap sweater. By the time Nia's driver opened the door of her limousine, the story was already trending. The $10 million rip was the #1 hashtag globally. Inside the gala, the party had disintegrated into chaos. Investors who were present at the dinner began making calls to pull their own smaller funding from Arthur's ventures, terrified of being associated with a sinking ship. The visual of Arthur van der Hoeven on his knees begging a black woman for forgiveness while his wife stood amidst the ruins of their reputation became the defining image of the holiday season. Within 24 hours, the board of the foundation voted to remove Victoria and Arthur from all leadership positions, citing gross misconduct and reputational damage. The bank foreclosed on their Hamptons estate 3 days after Christmas. But for Nia, the victory wasn't in their poverty. It was in the shift of the narrative. The next morning, she sat in her penthouse, drinking hot cocoa, watching the snow fall. Her assistant called, breathless. Nia, the Harlem Youth Center, donations are pouring in. People are matching your redirected 10 million. We're at 25 million and counting. They're calling it the Nia effect. Nia smiled, looking at the scar on her hand, a small burn mark from years ago when she worked 2 jobs in a kitchen to put herself through college. She remembered the nights she had prayed for a break, for someone to just give her a chance. She had become that chance for herself and now for thousands of others. The phone rang again. It was Arthur. She let it go to voicemail. She picked up a new envelope, addressed to the youth center, and sealed it. Victoria van der Hoeven spent that Christmas in a hotel room paid for by her sister, reading comments online from strangers who dissected her cruelty. She had tried to gatekeep luxury, only to find herself locked out of it forever. The irony was poetic. She had poured wine on dignity and drowned in the consequences. Years later, that gala is still spoken of in hushed tones. It serves as a grim reminder to the elite of the city. You never know who is standing in front of you. The woman you refuse to serve might own the building. The man you ignore might hold your debt. And the check you tear up might be the only thing keeping your world from collapsing. Nia Sterling continued to rise, her empire growing not just in wealth, but in influence. She never attended the Van der Hoeven Gala again, mostly because it ceased to exist. But every Christmas, she held her own dinner. A dinner where the entry fee wasn't money, but kindness. Where the billionaires sat next to community organizers, and where no one, absolutely no one, was judged by the dress they wore or the color of their skin. And as for the red velvet dress Victoria wore that night, it was sold at an auction of seized assets for a fraction of its price. The buyer? Nia Sterling. She didn't wear it. She had it cut up and sewn into blankets for the shelter. A fitting end for a garment that had witnessed so much coldness to finally, in its destruction, provide a little bit of warmth. This is the story of the check that changed everything. It reminds us that true class isn't about what you have in the bank, but how you treat those who have nothing. If this story resonated with you, if you felt that spark of justice when the tables turned, please subscribe to Her Secrets, Her Stories. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder of their own worth. And remember, in a world full of Victorias, be a Nia. Stand tall, speak your truth, and never let anyone tear up your value. Until next time.